watching FPV by the Numbers, and I'm Kaz Walker. In this live stream, I'm going to be doing a quick summary of my 1 week experience with the Diatone GT-R90. So yeah, let's jump right in. To start with, I'm going to go over the changes and things that I've noticed about the frame. So the first thing, if you watched me do the setup for this thing that I made a live stream last Sunday, one of the things I complained about was that the hardware was Philips hardware and that it tended to round out. So like even before I managed to get this thing apart to get a receiver in here, I had one of these screws up here get rounded out, and so that was originally a Philips. And the nice thing about this is it's all using M2 hardware as far as I've been, or at least all the screws that I've tested or taken out so far has all been M2 hardware. So it's nice that it's really easy to replace. And all I did was, so these little screws here, these are 5mm, and these are the motor screws here. You can see that I've swapped out the motor screws. These ones are 6mm M2s. These ones are 5mm M2s. However, in some cases I swap them out for 6mm, and in some cases I swap them out for 4, but I'll go over that. So in the front here, to remove the cage stay here at the front, I swapped out the screws because these were the ones that originally gave me a lot of grief, and these ones I used 6mm screws to go into this stay, and you can see that it goes through, and it doesn't. Oh, let me see if I can get this in camera. So you can see that it goes through and it doesn't stick up above at all. So you can see the screw in there. It's still recessed down into the hole, so that's really nice. The screw's not poking out and making the build look sloppy or anything like that. So I really appreciated that. The carbon fiber did get ground a little bit when I screwed this in the first time, or ground down a little bit before when I put this in the first time. So that's something to note, but it doesn't even look like they're, well, you can't even see where it ground down, so it's probably just somewhere inside in that little recess. So the other screws that I changed to make accessing the cage easy. Oh, and just on a side note, that's all I really changed for hardware. Aside from the motor screws, I only changed hardware to make taking the cage off easier, because I've had to take the cage off a few times now because I've been having some issues getting SmartPort working, but I'll go into those issues about SmartPort and the receiver a little bit later. Anyways, so with these screws at the back here that go into the rear cage stay, I replaced these with 4mm M2 screws, and I don't know if you could do 6mm here, so if you only have like 6mm M2 hardware, because that's pretty common in motor screws and for propeller screws, you might have some issues just because it looks like this aluminum piece here is probably pretty short, and I don't know if you could really have two screws of that length, or if they would make contact. I also don't know if this goes all the way through, but 4mm screws on the back here, more than enough threads to bite and really hold that. And the nice thing about having it set up this way is that you can come in and you can just go right in there and take it out. Whereas before, when it was a Phillips screw, I would have, or at least for the screwdrivers I have, just because the shank is a bit thick on the screwdriver, I would end up having to take off the motor, and it was a bit of a pain. So switching out these screws made it a lot easier to work on this model. So the other thing that I mentioned before was the motor screws. Let's see if I can find an example of a screw that I really rounded out here. Oh, there it is. So I had a lot of trouble with the hardware. Like if you're going to be switching between prop guards or no prop guards and prop guards, you're probably going to have some trouble, and these screws will eventually round out on you. So I definitely recommend switching over to the hex driver if you can, just because it'll make your life a lot easier. But aside from that, that's really the only issues, so to speak, I found with the frame. The only other minor annoyance, or this could be an issue for some people, is because this is supposed to be an indoor flyer. I found it a little overpowered to be an indoor flyer, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in the stream. But this is actually the most shallow camera tilt angle that you can do, and it's for indoor flying. If you want to do some nice slow shots, it's still kind of steep, I found. Like you'll tend to go a little too fast. You could probably just adapt to it, but if you're used to being able to fly indoors with a really shallow camera angle, this might be a bit aggressive. And the reason for that is that the board actually bumps into this aluminum standoff here. So it's a little bit of a problem, but really, like overall, just given the quality of this thing and how nice it flies, it's a really minor issue. And yeah, that's pretty much all the problems I found for or issues I ran into with the frame. The only other thing is on a crash, I did break the prop guard pretty easily. So if you're going to fly this indoors a lot, definitely pick up some spare prop guards. And if you break one like I did before you manage to get any spares, you should be able to super glue this together. And if you have issues with it coming apart like it is now and you see this little gap, just take a little twist tie to clamp it together here, kind of hold it in place, and then just lightly bring the twist tie up to the top of the bars here, and then lightly give it a twist so it's a little tight, and a little too tight then. Give it a little bit of a twist so that it will hold its position, and then you can just glue it, and then that's more than stable enough so you can get a nice solid glue job done there. So that's one little tip, and something I'm going to be doing after this video. So the other thing I mentioned before was, actually I didn't mention this, the props. I switched out the props. This is a 2030 prop. This is the one that came stock with it. These props are okay. They're not really the greatest, and they're also pretty soft. I think these are made of ABS, so if you crash with these, they're probably not gonna hold up too well. But the ones that I put on here just to begin with, I never even bothered putting the stock props on. That's why they have no marks on them, because probably would have crashed into something with them. But I used the GemFan Flash, and these are a 2040 prop, so they have a much more aggressive pitch on them. And it does give you quite a bit more power. So that was, and also the tune, it's easier to find a tune for these, because Albert Kim did a video where he did a tune on these with these propellers and with a 3-cell battery. He also did a tune with a 4-cell battery like this one right here. So if you want a place to start with these propellers, you've got a nice place to start. And I've seen on a couple videos that it was mentioned that the tune, that the factory tune or PID settings on this model aren't actually for this propeller, so that's a little bit strange. I'm not sure if that's true or not, though. I think I was listening to Let's Drown Out a couple days ago, and they mentioned that, but I haven't confirmed that, so take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, so before I go into the issues I've had with the receiver, I'm going to quickly switch over to a desktop view here and just show you what I'm using for PIDs. It's pretty much based off of what Albert Kim did in his tuning video, but I also changed my rates up a little bit, so I'll also show you that. So I'll just switch the view here, and then switch over to Betaflight, get connected, go to the PID tuning tab. So I kept everything stock on profile 1 and rate profile 1, and I just made my changes to rate profile 2. That way I can easily switch back to the stock settings if I want to. So these are I'm pretty sure these are the PIDs from Albert Kim's video. 90% sure on that, because since I didn't get SmartPort working, I didn't really do too much PID tuning on this. So that's something I'm going to be doing in the future is more PID tuning. But one thing I did change was the RC rates. So personally, I like to fly around 1100 degrees in roll and pitch, and then a little bit less at about 1000 on the yaw. And I like to mix together, changing the RC rate, the super rate, and adding a bit of expo, so the curve comes out looking something like this. So you have this nice flat section for control in the middle, so you can do smaller adjustments and it makes hovering easier. The other thing I changed was I put in some D set point weight and D set point transition. These are pretty minor compared to just not having it on at all, so just a little bit there to help out with changing on the stick. So the other thing is if you change into a different rate profile, the anti-gravity gain I noticed is at 3 from the stock settings, so I just copied that on over. And the TPA, instead of being 0, it's a 0.2. So that's, I'm not actually quite sure what TPA is. I've never really messed around with it too much. But something I'll probably play with in the future. But if you want to keep the settings close to stock and only be changing the PIDs, those are the two things to keep the same. So that's pretty much it for PIDs. So I'll just switch back to the different view here. Oops. So there we go. And I'll go over the issues I've had getting SmartPort working so far. So originally, when I wired this up, what I was going to do was I was going to use soft serial because these solder points on here to solder to uninverted signals are quite small, and I wanted to avoid that if possible. But I think, well, at this point I've tried a bunch of different things, and I think I'm going to, and the last thing I'm going to try is doing the uninverted signal hack, so just taking a little wire off there and putting it into one of the transmit ports on the board. But what I wanted to do was use soft serial, and I did that. I set it up. All the settings appear to be correct. And then I did a little bit of research and found that sometimes, well, or at least in the firmware for the r-xsr here, there's an update for it that works with the PID settings of the beta, or setting the PID settings from the Lua scripts, and that also includes your VTX settings, setting those from the Lua scripts on your Tyrannus. So I tried doing that, and that's why I have the servo cable out here. So I updated the radio to the latest firmware, tried it again, still doesn't work. So without breaking out an oscilloscope and figuring out if it's really coming out of this this transmit serial port 6 transmit pin, I don't know if it's actually getting the signal sent out in the correct way, inverted. So So that was, or that is the issue I'm running into currently, and the way I'm going to try and address this is to solder to that little, you can just barely see it here, or at least it doesn't look very clear when I'm looking on the monitor, but, oh yeah, that's okay. But this second little gold circle right here by the tip, if you take a really close look, there's a little P above it. That is the uninverted smart port. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder a wire onto there, and then solder it onto transmit pad 6 on the flight controller, and hopefully that will get me smart port. And if it does, I'll post a video, and if it doesn't, I'll do a really detailed video, probably about 5-10 minutes, of everything I did, and basically just kind of throw it out to people who are watching the video to see if they can figure it out. But it's not too bad though, because the PID settings, you can still set it through the OSD, you can still set the VTX through the OSD, so overall the general functionality isn't too limited or encumbered by not having smart port. But given how many features this model has, having smart port on this thing would be really awesome, and it would just make it perfect, because then you could just, you could take it out to a field or wherever you want to meet up, flying it indoors, warehouse, something like that, and you can fly with a couple other people, and you don't have to really mess around setting your VTX settings, and that would be great, because you could just do it all from the controller. But haven't gotten that working yet. So that's where I'll leave it for the smart port settings. So like I said, there's still a few things that I want to try out with this model. One thing that I was kind of thinking about, and that that a commenter on one of my videos, I can't remember which video it was, they suggested trying a 2-cell battery on this, and I think that's a great idea, just to take out some of the power. If you're flying indoors and you find this thing a little too powerful, switching it down to 2S is potentially an option. I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know if it's still flyable when you do that, but that is something I'll be doing coming up soon. I'll probably do that, I'll try and get it done next week, but I finally got my shipping notification from Banggood, so next week I'll probably be more focused on doing my Tiny Whoop build. And longer term, so I'll be going to Calgary halfway through the month, and I'll have a bunch of open spaces to fly in, where it's not raining so much, and where the ground isn't so wet. I'll just have to worry about snow and ice, which I think is probably going to be more forgiving on a quad than landing in a puddle, because I'm in Vancouver right now. I live in Vancouver, and it's been pretty constant rain, and when it's not raining, there's a bunch of puddles, and this thing's a little too new for me to risk wanting to fly it into a puddle. So, but I did find these 4-cell batteries. They're designed for an H-frame, so they're in the skinny orientation, so I'll just mount them like this, so the cells on the side will have a little bit less protection when I'm flying around, but I think it'll be fine. And these are 450 milliamps, 75 Cs, and as you can see, they're tattoo, so these should be really nice cells. I got this from Airblade UAV, so if you haven't heard of them, I highly recommend checking them out. They've got a great selection of batteries and really nice smaller frames. They even have some 5-inch frames, but personally I like the 3-inch size. So yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of batteries and what I'm going to be trying coming up. And if you have any questions, or if you want me to try something with this model, or if you're having any issues, please leave it in the comments below, because I'd like to get more information about this model and just how people are experiencing it, so to speak, like just in terms of the setup and the camera settings and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for this live stream. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, And if you like live streams, I try to do about 2 to 3 live streams a week for FPV related content, whether that's radio, transmitter, build videos, or just reviews and troubleshooting models like this one. And that's kind of going to be the theme going forward, as well as doing motor testings. I plan to get a motor thrust stand and actually start testing some motor prop combinations to see what's the most efficient and what produces the most thrust. And that's kind of why the name is FPV by the numbers, because I'd like to do this in a more numeric kind of sense and actually gather data. So that wraps it up for this live stream. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed it, hit the like button, and if you like the live streams, like I said before, please consider subscribing, and I will talk to you guys later. Thanks, bye-bye.